The man who wrote more than half of the New Testament began his story holding the cloaks of those who stoned a man to death. Saul of Tarsus watched the execution of Stephen without moving a single muscle. He observed, approved, and then left to continue destroying the church that was still in its earliest days. But what happened to him a few years later on a dusty road in Syria remains the most radical transformation that any historical text has ever recorded. Paul of Tarsus wrote Romans, Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Thessalonians, Timothy, Titus, and Philemon. 13 letters that shaped the New Testament and defined Christian theology for 2 millennia. He never met Jesus in person like the other apostles did, but he experienced the most documented encounter with Christ in history. That moment shattered him completely, only to rebuild him in a way no one had the language to describe. To understand Paul, you first need to understand Saul. The same man, yet in moments so opposite they seem like 2 completely different people. Saul was a Pharisee, a student of Gamaliel, the greatest rabbi of his era, a Roman citizen by birth, a Jew of the finest lineage, and a ruthless persecutor of Christians with absolute religious conviction. He didn't hunt them out of malice, but out of pure devotion. He genuinely believed he was faithfully executing the will of God. The early church was fragile. Jesus had been crucified only a few years prior. The disciples hid in houses, preaching in the quiet alleys of Jerusalem, and Saul found them one by one. He invaded homes, dragging men and women to prison. The book of Acts says he ravaged the church. The Greek word used is the same one applied to a wild beast tearing through a field. Saul didn't persecute out of convenience. He destroyed out of principle, until the road to Damascus changed it all. Tarsus was no ordinary city. It was a major metropolis of the ancient world, the capital of Cilicia, renowned for its schools of philosophy and rhetoric. It rivaled Athens in intellectual sophistication. To be born there meant growing up immersed in 2 cultures at once, the Jewish with its laws and the Greco-Roman with its debaters. Paul was fiercely shaped by both. This explains why he could speak to Jews and Greeks with equal fluency and deep theological insight. Paul's family was Jewish, from the tribe of Benjamin, the same as King Saul, who inspired his Hebrew name. But they were also Roman citizens by birth, a rare and valuable privilege in the 1st century. This citizenship granted access to legal rights that most provincials would never see. Later, it would be this exact status that saved Paul's life in Jerusalem and took him to Rome for judgment before Caesar. A simple detail of birth that would define the church's future. At the feet of Gamaliel, Paul learned the Torah to a depth few ever reached. Gamaliel was the most respected rabbi of his generation. Even the Sanhedrin listened to him. Paul absorbed the law, the methods of interpretation, the rabbinic reasoning, and the art of arguing sacred texts. Later, when writing about grace in contrast to the law, he knew exactly what he was talking about. He wasn't a former pagan discussing the law. He was a man who had intensely lived it from the inside out. The stoning of Stephen marked the first martyrdom of the church. He was a deacon, chosen to serve tables, but became a powerful preacher. Brought before the Sanhedrin on blasphemy charges, he delivered a speech spanning from Abraham to the temple. Then he looked up and said, "I see the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." That was the end. They led him outside the city and began the stoning. Saul was there, holding the cloaks of the stone throwers, approving every single hit. What Saul felt in that moment, the text doesn't reveal. It only states he approved of Stephen's death. Right after, he launched into the work with fierce intensity, entering house after house, dragging men and women to prison. The persecution scattered the church across Judea, inadvertently spreading the gospel far beyond Jerusalem. What Saul intended to destroy, He was actually disseminating. History holds a cruel irony for those trying to contain the uncontainable. The Christians fled. They went to Antioch, Damascus, and Alexandria, carrying the very message Saul wanted to eliminate. In Antioch, for the first time, followers of Jesus were called Christians. The church grew as it ran. Determined to cut the problem at its root, Saul got authorization letters from the high priest to go to Damascus. He planned to arrest any followers of the way and bring them back in chains. It was a perfectly legal mission. In his eyes, it was a holy crusade. Damascus was roughly 240 kilometers from Jerusalem, a journey of several days across the arid Syrian desert. Saul set out with his companions, the high priest's letters in hand, and the absolute conviction of someone doing God's work. He was a man on a mission. He knew exactly what he wanted to do and exactly why he was doing it. And as he approached Damascus, on an afternoon that would become the turning point in Christian history, the sky suddenly changed. Suddenly, a light more intense than the midday sun surrounded him on all sides. Saul fell to the dirt. Then he heard a voice, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" The question didn't come from a stranger. It came from someone who knew his name. Saul asked, "Who are you, Lord?" And the answer crushed his soul. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." In a split second, everything he believed about Christians completely collapsed. The relentless hunter had finally met the hunted. Saul was blind for 3 days, without eating or drinking. The men traveling with him led him by the hand into Damascus, the same destination, but with an entirely different purpose than planned. While Saul sat in silence in a house on the street called Straight, something was happening across the city. A disciple named Ananias was receiving a vision. "Rise and go to the street called Straight, and at the house of Judas ask for a man of Tarsus named Saul. He is praying." Ananias froze. He knew the name of Saul. Every Christian in Damascus knew it with terror. "Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much evil he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And here he has authority to bind all who call on your name." Jesus' response was direct. "Go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before the Gentiles and kings and Israel. For I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name." The instruction was clear. So was the cost. Ananias went. He entered the house, laid his hands on Saul and said, "Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road, has sent me so you may regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit." Immediately, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes and he could see. He rose, was baptized, ate, and regained strength. Saul's conversion wasn't gradual. It was instantaneous, violent, like a blinding light splitting the darkness without ever asking for permission. What unfolded in the following days shocked everyone. Saul entered the Damascus synagogues, the exact places where he was supposed to arrest Christians, and began preaching that Jesus was the Son of God. His listeners were stunned. "Isn't this the man who ravaged those invoking this name in Jerusalem?" The authority in Saul's preaching was deeply unsettling. He knew the scriptures inside out. Now, he weaponized them to boldly prove everything he had once tried to brutally destroy. The Jews of Damascus plotted to kill him. The irony was complete. Saul had arrived to arrest Christians, and now it was the Jews who wanted his head. The disciples lowered him over the city wall in a basket at night, in silence, like a fugitive. Back in Jerusalem, he tried to join the apostles, but no one believed he was really a disciple. They remembered the Saul who had devastated the churches. The suspicion was understandable and deep. It was Barnabas who interceded for him. Barnabas brought Saul to the apostles and explained everything, how he had seen the Lord on the road and preached fearlessly in Damascus. Gradually, the Jerusalem community accepted him. But peace didn't last. Saul began debating the Greek-speaking Hellenists, who quickly plotted to kill him. The brothers intervened, escorting him to Caesarea and sending him back to Tarsus. Saul returned home radically transformed in a way no word could capture, and the church rested for a season. In Tarsus, Saul stayed for a period that likely lasted up to 10 years. The book of Acts skips over this time. But when Barnabas went to Tarsus to bring him to Antioch, Saul arrived as a man fully ready. They labored together for a whole year in Antioch, teaching massive crowds. There, for the first time, the disciples were called Christians, and it was from Antioch, not Jerusalem, that the great mission to the Gentiles launched. Saul embraced a new name, Paul, and he finally set out. The first missionary journey took Paul and Barnabas to Cyprus, Pisidian Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. In each city, a pattern emerged. Paul preached in the synagogue. Some Jews believed, others revolted. Gentiles responded with pure enthusiasm, and intense persecution drove them out. In Lystra, they stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city gates, assuming he was dead. The disciples gathered around him. He simply got up, and the very next morning, he pressed forward. 5 times Paul received 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times he was beaten with rods. Once he was stoned. 3 times shipwrecked, a day and a night adrift at sea, in danger from rivers, robbers, his own people, Gentiles, in cities, in the wilderness, at sea, from false brothers, in toil and hardship through many sleepless nights, in hunger and thirst. He listed this in 2 Corinthians as if reading a grocery list, without drama, just cold, steady facts. The second missionary journey expanded the map beyond where any disciple had gone before. Paul crossed Asia Minor, reached Macedonia, setting foot on European soil for the first time. In Philippi, he cast out a demon from a slave girl, was beaten, imprisoned, chained. At midnight, an earthquake shook the prison. The doors opened. The prisoners stayed. The terrified jailer asked, "What must I do to be saved?" Paul answered with the summary of everything he would preach for the rest of his life. In Athens, Paul waited alone for Silas and Timothy. Walking the city, he was provoked by its endless idols. He debated in the Agora, the marketplace of ideas in the world's most intellectual city. Epicurean and Stoic philosophers brought him to the Areopagus. There, Paul did something unprecedented. He didn't quote scriptures. He used the culture of the Greeks themselves. He started with the altar to the unknown God and brilliantly built his argument from there. Paul stayed in Corinth for 18 months. It was the most corrupt, cosmopolitan, and diverse city in the Mediterranean. What happened there sparked the 2 longest letters in the New Testament. The Corinthian church was absolute chaos, plagued by divisions, immorality, and fierce conflicts over the resurrection. Paul wrote them with a father's patience and a teacher's demands. The legendary 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, the hymn of love, was born to crush an ego dispute. The third journey took Paul back to Asia Minor, with Ephesus as his base for 3 years. There, the gospel grew so much that craftsmen who sold figurines of Artemis panicked over falling sales. Demetrius the silversmith convened an assembly that became a riot. "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." For nearly 2 hours, the crowd chanted. The city clerk calmed them down with difficulty. Paul wanted to enter the arena. The disciples would not let him. From Ephesus, Paul wrote to the Romans, the most systematic and profound letter in Christian correspondence. In 16 chapters, he built the definitive argument for salvation by faith, the link between law and grace, Israel's place in God's plan, and the strict ethics of community life, Theologians have spent 2 millennia studying this text. Augustine used it for his conversion. Luther used it to reform the church, and Barth wrote a commentary that shook 20th century theology. Back in Jerusalem, Paul was recognized in the temple by Jews from Asia who had seen him in Ephesus. Accused of bringing Gentiles into the holy site, the crowd seized him. They were about to kill him when Roman soldiers intervened. The commander arrested him, but backed off in alarm upon discovering Paul was a Roman citizen. That legal status, mentioned only once in his entire life, had just saved him from a brutal mob. But the cold reality of prison was still directly ahead of him. In Caesarea, Paul was held prisoner for 2 years, while the governor Felix waited for a bribe that never came. Then Festus took the position and, not knowing what to do with Paul, proposed trying him in Jerusalem, which Paul knew meant his death. He played his final card. I appeal to Caesar. As a Roman citizen, he had the right to be judged by the emperor himself. Festus could not deny it. The decision was made. Paul would go to Rome, not as a voluntary apostle, as a prisoner of Nero. The shipwreck on the way to Rome is among the most vivid accounts in the New Testament. 14 days adrift in the Mediterranean in a storm, the crew throwing cargo overboard. Everyone without food, terrified, convinced they would die. Paul, the prisoner, was the only one who kept them calm. An angel had told him he would reach Rome. He believed it. And when the ship ran aground on the coast of Malta, all 276 people on board survived, exactly as Paul had said. In Rome, Paul spent 2 years under house arrest, chained to a guard but free to write. Philippians, Ephesians, Colossians, and Philemon were born there. Philippians is his most intimate letter, penned from inside a cold cell. I have learned, in whatever state I am, to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In every circumstance, I have learned the secret. This was a profound art, mastered through intense physical suffering, never through mere theory. What Paul built over 20 years of mission was invisible on the map, but revolutionary in history. Communities scattered across the entire Mediterranean basin, Philippi, Thessalonica, Corinth, Ephesus, Rome, Galatia, Colossae. Not nations, not armies. Groups of people, many of them slaves or poor, gathered in homes, sharing bread and reading letters from a man who had transformed persecution into apostolate. In every city, a spark. In every community, a flame. There is a question Paul's story inevitably raises. Why did God choose the persecutor? There were 12 apostles who had walked with Jesus. There was Mary Magdalene, who saw him risen. There was Stephen, who died preaching. Why was the man who held the cloaks during Stephen's stoning chosen to carry the gospel to the nations? The only answer Paul himself offers is grace, the unmerited favor that transforms precisely what cannot transform itself on its own. Paul never forgot his past. In his letters, he calls himself the least of the apostles and the chief of sinners. This wasn't false modesty. It was memory. The memory of Stephen falling beneath the stones while he stood there, approving. That memory didn't paralyze him. Instead, it became the fuel of his mission. He who received the most grace had the most to give. And Paul gave with an energy that no other apostle ever equaled in geographical scope or literary output. In 2 Timothy, likely the last letter Paul penned from a Roman dungeon before his execution, one sentence captures it all. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness. Paul wasn't boasting. He was taking a brutal inventory. A man who once tried to annihilate the faith was now dying for it. His only pride was recording that he had fought with honor, that he finished what he had started. Christian tradition holds that Paul was beheaded in Rome around the year 67 during Nero's persecution. There was no miracle to save him that morning. But in his lifetime, he had crossed the Mediterranean 3 times, founded dozens of communities, and written 13 letters that 2 billion people still read today. The persecutor became an apostle. The destroyer became a builder. The man who held the cloaks of those killing became the stone upon which the Western Church was built. What Paul's story proves is not that good people reach heaven. It proves that the most unlikely people can be used for the most surprising purpose. There was no more inadequate resume than Saul of Tarsus's for the role of the great apostle to the Gentiles, and he was exactly the one chosen. The logic of God, at least in the biblical narrative, seems to operate in a way that consistently inverts human expectations about who deserves to be used and who does not. Paul wrote that he learned to be content in any state, in abundance and in need, but he also said he learned it. It was not automatic, it was not natural. It was a learning that came from being beaten, shipwrecked, imprisoned, stoned, betrayed. The contentment he describes is not passivity before life. It is the ability to find firm footing under any kind of ground. And that firm footing for Paul had a specific name. It was not a philosophy. It was a person. There is something unsettlingly contemporary about Paul's life. He lacked certainty about tomorrow. He wrote from prisons not knowing if he'd survive. He suffered from a thorn in the flesh and begged 3 times for healing. The sky remained silent. He faced bitter conflicts with co-workers, betrayals by communities, and imposters wrecking his work. Paul didn't live in a bubble of daily miracles. He bled in the same harsh reality we do, dealing with deep losses, real pain, and brutal doubt. If you are in the middle of a process you did not ask for, a transformation you did not plan, a Damascus road you did not choose, perhaps Paul's question is also yours. Lord, what do you want me to do? The answer did not come all at once. It came city by city, letter by letter, shipwreck by shipwreck. Paul's calling was not revealed in a single instant. It was discovered as he lived, suffered, preached, made mistakes, and rose again. That is usually how it works. Paul began holding cloaks. He ended holding the Mediterranean. The same intensity that made him the church's greatest persecutor made him its greatest missionary. God did not change Saul's nature. He redirected it. And if this story challenged you to look at where you are with different eyes, share it with someone also in the middle of a transformation they did not expect. Subscribe so you don't miss the next stories that prove the Bible knows real life.